Folks, welcome back after half term. So let's see where we are going next. So what do you think?
Phenomena. Phenomena. Phenomena.
Alrighty, so I know you're all ridiculously clever and you've all gone forward in your notes book. So we are looking at the diversity of organisms or classifications of organisms. It's roughly on page 230, or at least it is on my version of your book. And today we again remind ourselves about the difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, and we will also now go into a little bit more detail on them. We'll come back to that in a little while. So, classification. Some of these are going to be FYIs, but if you have to classify something, what does that mean? So in a biology sense, if you are into classification, you are going to be putting things into appropriate groups. So we're looking at living organisms and we're putting them into what we think is their appropriate group. And if you are an individual that studies classification, it is called taxonomy, and you are a taxonomist. So if you had to classify things, what groups would you put them into? So I'm pretty certain if we were in lesson, you would definitely give me plants and animals. You might give me some type of microorganisms, and you would be on the right track. So just to help us a little bit with our understanding, we're going to have a look at this.
So what are biological kingdoms? We're not talking royalty here, but they are pretty important in grouping or classifying organisms and understanding how they are related. You can learn more about what classification is in the Classifying Organisms video. Classification attempts to impose a hierarchy on the complex and dynamic variety of life on Earth by describing how different species group together and how related they are to one another or not. Kingdom is the second highest rank below the rank of domain in the sequence of classification. Remember that little rhyme from the Classifying Organisms video, do keep ponds clean or frogs get sick? Or you might prefer this one, definitely keep plucking chickens or face getting sacked. So now looking at how kingdoms are broken down. In 1969, an American plant ecologist called Robert Whittaker introduced a 5 kingdoms classification system with the following 5 kingdoms: Prokaryota, Protoctista, Fungi, Plantae, and Animalia, which was mainly based upon differences in nutrition. Each kingdom has characteristic features so that an organism can easily be assigned to one of the kingdoms. These characteristics are based on cell walls, whether they are eukaryotic, prokaryotic, and on the way they get nutrition. Starting with animals, also known as Animalia. They are eukaryotic, multicellular, and have no cell walls. They develop from blastocyst, which is part of the embryo development. They have both nervous and hormonal control system. They are heterotrophic, which means they eat stuff and have a digestive system. They are motile, which means they move. Cell division, which enables growth. This happens in the tissue. Plants are kingdom Plantae. They are eukaryotic and multicellular like animals. Unlike animals, they do have cell walls, with cellulose in. They are autotrophic, which means they use photosynthesis to make their own energy from sunlight. Their growth is restricted to meristems, which is layers of dividing cells. They are non-motile, and they have a leaf gas exchange system and are waterproofed. The fungi kingdom are eukaryotes and can be multicellular like animals and plants, but could also be unicellular such as yeast. They have cell walls like plants, but have a substance called chitin rather than cellulose. They are heterotrophic and saprotrophic, meaning they decompose, so they break things down, or are parasitic. The body of a fungus is composed of a thin filament called hypha. They secrete enzymes, do external digestion, and then absorb the resulting nutrients. The Protoctista kingdom are eukaryote-like animals and plants. They can be unicellular and multicellular, like the fungi. They have cell walls, sometimes with polysaccharides. They are autotrophic and heterotrophic. And finally, the Prokaryota kingdom. They are unicellular. They lack organelles that are seen in eukaryotes. They are typically really small, about 10 micrometers in size, much too small to see with the human eye. They have cell walls and are autotrophic, using photosynthesis and chemosynthesis without light, and are heterotrophic. They divide by binary fission, not mitosis. So from this video, you should know, kingdoms break down into 5 groups based upon different characteristics, including whether they have cell walls, are eukaryotic or prokaryotic, and how they get nutrition.
Now that is just an introduction. We do each of the 5 kingdoms in a huge amount of detail. The old school, sorry, we're going to go back here. So in terms of how we, for Leaving Cert, put them into, so 3, 4, 5, we have Monera, which are essentially bacteria. We have Protista, we call them. When we look at these, it is things like amoeba. We have fungi. And when we look at these, we do a mix of rhizopus, which is just the posh name for bread mold, and we also do a little bit on yeast. We have plantae, which are plants, and you've done most of your plant chapters now. Woohoo! And we have animalae, which are us and other animals. So, as I say, we will do each of these 5, but if you need a silly sentence, my silly sentence to remember it is, my puppy fools people always. Now, is it a good puppy or a bad puppy? Haven't decided. Okay, so they are the 5 kingdoms that we are interested in for Leaving Cert Biology. Now, in terms of the old school classification, this is just an FYI for your information only. You are either a plant or an animal, so this is coming from Aristotle in the 300 BCs, and it was used up until the 1600s. And compared to now, we have this 5 kingdom system, and that is our accepted method of classification. Okay, so we've just done this, the Monera, Protista, Amelia, and we have my puppy fools people always. Why aren't viruses put in here? So we would have started with one of these possibly in junior cycle, depending on who your teacher was, but we have definitely done honour when we did characteristics of life. So hopefully now you know that to be a living organism, you have to have organization, nutrition, excretion, response, and reproduction. So viruses don't fit honour. They don't have all that criteria. Excuse me. She's wanting to... No, doesn't want to play ball. So they don't have all aspects of what they have to have for living things. So for you, please, where it just says viruses, viruses have no metabolism. And again, we will do this when we do viruses. They are non-cellular, and they replicate rather than reproduce. How they so that's their kind of why they don't fit honour. And again, as I say, when we do viruses, they will kick in then. So each of the 5 kingdoms can be subdivided into smaller categories, which we've seen, and until this will keep continuing until the organisms are more and more similar. And then the very last category is a species. So in terms of us, we don't really go into huge amount of detail in terms of classification. We talk about our 5 kingdoms, and we will talk about species in a variety of contexts in terms of genetics. So we'll have our first, I'm pretty certain we haven't seen species yet. This is telling me we have, but I stand to be corrected if we have. So if you are a species, what does that mean? So you have to be capable of naturally interbreeding, and I put this word in because the SEC sometimes decide they really want it, and you have to produce fertile offspring. So you're naturally interbreeding and you produce fertile offspring. They are the two main criteria for something to be in the same species. Okay, now we then go back and remind ourselves about being prokaryotic and eukaryotic. So shout at the screen now. So if you are prokaryotic, you are the simpler version of a cell. So you have no membrane bound nucleus, and neither do you have membrane bound organelles. So what does the word membrane bound mean? It just means when we do all of our drawings of plant and animal cells and cell organelles, we always draw. So if this is our mitochondria, it has its membrane, and then it's going to have its little teeth in it, and I'm not drawing it very well today. It'll have its little piece of DNA. So the fact that these are a double membrane, that is a membrane bound organelle. And similarly, when we draw our nucleus, we draw it like this, inside and out. We have our little nucleolus and we have our chromatin in there, but again, when we draw our nucleus, it has a membrane to it. So that's what makes something eukaryotic. It have membrane bound nucleus, and also have membrane bound organelles. So that will be like a animal cell having mitochondria in there, plant cells having both mitochondria and chloroplasts, membrane bound organelles. Now, okay, so that leaves us with those. So on page 231 you have a table, and if we were doing this in lesson, you would be figuring out the 5 kingdoms via card sort. We don't unfortunately have that luxury today, but just to give you an idea, so Monera are the simplest of the kingdoms. They are prokaryotic, they don't have membrane bound organelles or membrane bound nucleus, and then you're getting more complicated as you go up through your kingdoms. And I suppose what this is showing you is the idea of evolution, so genetic changes over long periods of time to give new versions of an organism. And the idea that we have originated from a common ancestor way back here millions of years ago. Now, if we were to do our header, so our first header is the organism's name is Monera. It is a prokaryote. It is bacteria is our example. So I'll underline the things that are going to go in your table for you. Now, there are buckets of undiscovered bacteria out there. It is one of the most numerous organisms on the planet. You have more bacteria living in your large intestine than you have cells in your skin and in your body. So that's kind of crazy when you think about it. And first life was bacterial in nature, so they think. In terms of our main features, we have the idea that they're microscopic, they are single-celled, they have no membrane-bound nucleus, no membrane-bound organelles, so again, makes them prokaryotic, and they reproduce asexually. So if we've done bits on plants, but if you're reproducing asexually, you are cloning yourself essentially. You have only one parent, there's no gametes involved, and away you go. So we're putting this into our table, this into our table, this into our table, this into our table, and this. So these are going under the characteristics section. And at the bottom you have, is it prokaryotic or eukaryotic, and you're going to fill in the prokaryotic part. So these are just different bacteria, and we're going to do Monera as our next topic. So some of them will come with tails, some of them have hairs. These guys are all rod-shaped. these guys are probably rod shaped too, but you get ones that are spiral, so this could just about be spiral down here, and you can get some that are actually these guys down here are spherical, and you can get some that are spiral in shape. So there's three kind of main shapes for our Monera. So Protista is the next one, and again there's a huge amount of variety of them. So the ones that we the only one that we really look at is amoeba in our course, but algae is also a member of the Protista family. So there are examples, are algae and amoeba. And if you had to bet, my lovely mother-in-law, prokaryotic or eukaryotic, I'm hoping you're all saying Miss Eukaryotic. Okay, so they can be single-celled, but they can be multicellular. Algae is multicellular. They have their membrane-bound nucleus. They are heterotrophs, or at least some of them are. So you should be now thinking, what the hell is a heterotroph? So they have to eat other organisms to get their nutrition. Some are autotrophs, so they are making their own food for nutrition. So these are our Protista. So these are their characteristics, and you do know, because they have membrane-bound nucleus and membrane-bound organelles, that they are eukaryotic in nature. So really, Monera is the only prokaryote on our course. Okay, and as I say, we have seaweed, algae, and these guy over here is amoeba. And when we do amoeba, you hear the stories of people that have worn their contact lenses for months and months and months, and then it turns out there's an amoeba they're eating in through their eye and is swimming around in their aqueous and vitreous humor. Good times. So fungi, again, loads and loads of different species of them. So mushrooms, mildews, molds, yeasts, they're all going to be our examples of them. So when we talk about fungi, they will again be loads that are unclassified at this time, but their big role is they're great at decomposition, so breaking down dead organic matter, and they have a really important role in mineral recycling. So this is just an FYI for you. These guys are our examples. It's just information. So do we think prokaryotic or eukaryotic? You're shouting at me eukaryotic, and you're correct. So they are mostly cellular, but yeast are unicellular. And again, when we do fungi, we'll talk about this in more detail. They have, the way they organize their cells is that essentially they have big long tubes, no cell wall, or no cell wall between this big long tube. So this part would not be here in it. And those tubes are called hyphae. The carbohydrates, so the CHO, the carbohydrate they have in their cell wall is a thing called chitin, so it makes it very different to everything else. So if you can consider mushrooms, it's a real good example of like seeing chitin as opposed to cellulose, which you would get in plant matter. They are heterotrophs, so they have to eat other organisms to get their food. Fungi can reproduce both sexually and asexually. So they are going to go into your characteristics, and again, because once you're multicellular, you are going to be eukaryotic. So they have membrane-bound organelles and membrane-bound nucleus. So if we were drawing the tube would have loads of nuclei in it. There's no kind of distinction between what's holding the nuclei, as there would be in plant cells. So again, this is just different examples, and if you don't know what it is, you shouldn't eat it. Good rule. Alrighty, so in terms of our plants then, you can pick whatever examples you want, from something as simple as a daisy to an oak tree. Plants are obviously multicellular. Their carbohydrate now is cellulose. They have really large vacuoles in their plant cell structure. They will have their membrane-bound nucleus and organelles, which makes them eukaryotes, and they have the added advantage of being able to photosynthesize, making them autotrophs. And you will have the pleasure of learning about how plants sexually and asexually reproduce in Form 6. Can hardly wait. Okay, so this is our variety of plant matter. And then our last one is the animals. So again, you can pick whatever you want, but it's going from all the way from jellyfish to worms to lizards to us. So the variety in terms of animals is also huge. We can classify them even further. So in terms of their characteristics, you can be a vertebrate or an invertebrate. So you have a backbone or you don't. So that can go under characteristics for you. So that's one way. And as we say, we think we originally were bacteria. We became more complicated and left at the sea 700 million years ago. So in terms of the features, they're all multicellular. Again, they have their membrane-bound nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. They do not have cell walls. They are always heterotrophic, so they have to eat other organisms to make their food, and they will normally reproduce sexually. And that is bringing us pretty much to the end of our little bit on diversity. So again, just showing you 4 different types of animals, away you go. And here is just another way then of subdividing your animal kingdom. We don't go into this detail at all in Leaving Cert. If you do first year biology, there will be parts of classification where you will be going into more detail about stuff. But that is far in your future. And that is us.